We have explored less than 5% of our own ocean. That means 95% of the underwater world is just a complete blank space. And when you have a void that incredibly massive, it obviously means one thing.
We don't actually know what is down there.
And because we know basically nothing about the deep ocean, a very popular theory has popped up thousands of times. What if the Megalodon didn't actually go extinct? What if, when the surface of the ocean started changing, this giant shark just swam down into the Mariana Trench, the absolute deepest place on Earth, and simply hid? Could the ultimate ocean predator have survived extinction by just moving to the bottom of the world? Well, to figure that out, we first have to ask, is it even scientifically possible for an extinct animal to be able to hide from us, the smartest creatures on the planet, for millions of years? You might think that if science declares an animal extinct, it's definitively gone forever. But history has actually proven that we can be really wrong about that. Take the coelacanth, for example. This is a prehistoric deep-water fish that scientists fully believed went extinct 65 million years ago, right around the exact time the dinosaurs got wiped out. For decades, the only proof we had this thing ever existed was fossilized bones trapped in rocks. Science confidently wrote it off as completely dead. That was until 1938, when a local fisherman off the coast of South Africa just casually pulled a live one up in his net. This was a massive shock. An animal had successfully hidden from humanity for 65 million years, completely undetected, simply because it lived in deep water where we couldn't easily look. So, if a prehistoric fish can pull off the ultimate disappearing act for tens of millions of years, it actually makes a lot of sense why people think a giant shark could do the exact same thing. If the coelacanth can hide, why not the Megalodon? Which, for the record, I don't recommend trying. But before we drop a Megalodon into the deep ocean, we need to understand exactly what we're trying to hide. Just how big of a shark are we actually talking about? When most people try to picture a Megalodon, they usually just imagine a great white shark, but scaled up a little bit. Yeah? No. A fully grown great white shark is dangerous. Yes, they can reach about 15 to 20 feet long and weigh around 5,000 pounds. To a human, that's a terrifying apex predator. But to a Megalodon, a great white is basically a snack. Megalodons averaged around 50 feet in length, with some estimates pushing them even closer to 60 feet. They weighed up to 50 tons. Their jaws were so large that a fully grown adult human could literally stand straight up inside their mouth without touching the top teeth. And their bite force was strong enough to crush a car. Because of this size, chasing down tiny fish or seals was a complete waste of energy. Their entire evolutionary purpose was to hunt and kill literal whales. This is an animal that requires thousands upon thousands of calories every single day just to keep its heart beating. So you can't just hide a 50-ton whale-eating shark in a normal coral reef or off the coast of a beach. Someone would notice. If this thing is actually alive today, you need a very specific, incredibly deep hiding spot. If you want to hide the biggest shark in history, you basically only have one option: the Mariana Trench. This is a massive drop-off at the bottom of the Pacific Ocean. It's the absolute deepest point on the planet. To put the depth into perspective, if you took Mount Everest, the tallest mountain on Earth, and plunged it upside down into the Mariana Trench, the tip of the mountain would still be completely submerged under 7,000 feet of water. It's completely isolated from the surface world. There's zero sunlight, the water is freezing, and human activity is basically non-existent. Satellites can't see it, fishing boats can't drop nets into it, and military submarines can't even come close to reaching the bottom. Only a handful of people in all of human history have ever actually gone down there. It's essentially a massive blind spot. So, location-wise, it's perfect. The trench is definitely deep enough to hide a 60-foot shark. But if Megalodon actually moved down there millions of years ago, what would happen to its body? If a group of Megalodons retreated to the deep ocean to survive an extinction event, they wouldn't just stay the exact same. Evolution would take over. When animals move into the deep sea, their bodies start doing some really weird things. First of all, having color becomes completely useless. There's no sunlight to reflect off your skin, so producing pigment is just a waste of energy. Over a few million years, our deep-sea Megalodon would lose its gray coloring and turn completely pale or even translucent, like a ghost. Second, eyes are expensive to maintain. If you live in the dark, you don't need them. So, the Megalodon would likely go completely blind, with its eyes shrinking down to useless little dots or disappearing altogether. Instead of seeing, it would have to rely entirely on electroreception. Basically, they just use the pores on their face to feel the electricity of other animals moving around. So at this point, you don't even really have a shark anymore. You just have a 50-foot monster silently navigating the abyss. This sounds completely terrifying, but there's a glaring issue with this setup. What exactly is this thing eating? Remember, the Megalodon is basically 50 tons of hyperactive muscle, and a body that big requires a massive amount of food. Up at the surface, the Megalodon fueled itself by eating baleen whales. Whales are slow, packed with blubber, and relatively easy to track down if you're a 50-foot shark. But whales are mammals. They have to breathe air, which means whales don't live in the Mariana Trench, because holding your breath for the rest of your life is generally a pretty terrible survival strategy. If the Megalodon is hiding at the bottom of the ocean, its primary food source is just gone. And good luck trying to fuel a 50-ton body on a diet of deep-sea shrimp. If the whales are off the menu, the Megalodon is forced to start fighting the actual monsters of the deep. Things like the colossal squid. If a Megalodon is roaming the deep ocean looking for a meal, a colossal squid is one of the only animals big enough to actually be worth the effort. But realistically, this is a terrible fight for the shark. Hunting a whale at the surface is straightforward because whales are basically just giant and completely defenseless. A colossal squid is a 1,000-pound predator armed with dozens of hooks on its tentacles. So how would this fight actually play out in the dark? The Megalodon would have to rely on its electroreception to sense the squid. It would launch an ambush, trying to crush the squid's mantle instantly. But if the shark misses the vital organs, it's now in a brawl with a creature that has 8 arms and 2 feeding tentacles. The squid would wrap around the shark's face, digging those hooks directly into Megalodon's eyes and gills, which is probably going to tickle. Could the Megalodon win? Probably. A bite force that can crush a car is going to do some serious damage to a soft-bodied squid. But in the wild, getting severely injured usually just means you die slowly of an infection a week later. Spending all that energy to fight a creature that can rip your gills apart in the dark is a terrible survival strategy. But honestly, even if the Megalodon could win this fight flawlessly every single time, this entire scenario is completely hypothetical, because the real Mariana Trench doesn't even have squids. It's fun to picture the bottom of the ocean as this epic battleground where giant squids and prehistoric sharks are constantly fighting each other in the dark. Unfortunately, the Mariana Trench is just incredibly boring. The trench is part of the Hadal Zone, which is the absolute deepest layer of the ocean, and the Hadal Zone is essentially just completely empty. Deep-sea giantism, the effect that makes things like squids and spiders grow to massive sizes, actually has a limit. Once you get deep enough into the trench, the giantism effect completely stops, and things actually start getting smaller again. You aren't going to find giant squids, whales, or massive fish down here. The trench is mostly just packed with tiny crustaceans called amphipods, small translucent snailfish, and sea cucumbers. So, if it actually lived down here, the most terrifying apex predator in Earth's history would be forced to hunt sea cucumbers. The entire food web is built on marine snow, which is essentially just dead plankton and fish poop slowly drifting down from the surface. It's a barren wasteland. There's literally just not enough food at the bottom of the trench to keep a 50-ton predator alive, let alone an entire family of them. A Megalodon would starve to death in a matter of days. But let's just pretend, for the sake of argument, that there's somehow a secret buffet of food down there. Even with unlimited food, the Megalodon's own body would actively betray it. To understand why the Megalodon can't live in the deep, you have to look at how its body actually functioned. Megalodons were warm water predators. We know this because we find their fossils almost exclusively in areas that used to be warm tropical seas. They had high metabolisms designed to generate bursts of speed to ambush fast-moving whales. But a high metabolism requires heat. The water in the Mariana Trench is just a few degrees above freezing. It's permanently cold. If a warm water shark swims into near freezing water, its core temperature plummets, its muscles stiffen, its heart rate drops. The shark becomes incredibly sluggish, and eventually its internal organs just completely shut down. Evolution takes millions of years to completely change how a body handles heat. A Megalodon couldn't just decide to swim down into the freezing abyss and adapt on the fly. It would literally freeze to death before it ever reached the bottom. But let's pretend it somehow survives the freezing cold. Let's pretend it has a magic heater. it still has to deal with the ocean literally trying to crush it. The pressure at the bottom of the Mariana Trench is over 1,000 times what it's up at the surface. Having that much water above you is the equivalent of having an adult African elephant stand on every single square inch of your body. Animals that live in the trench survive this because their bodies look like, well, this. They're basically just made of jelly. They don't have rigid structures or air pockets that can be crushed. They're built to bend and flow with the weight of the water. Sharks, however, are built completely different. Sharks don't have bone skeletons like we do. Their entire skeleton is made of cartilage. Cartilage is great for staying lightweight in shallow water, but it's absolutely terrible at withstanding crushing pressure. If a 50-foot surface shark tried to dive into the Mariana Trench, the sheer weight of the water would compress its cartilage skeleton. Its internal cavities would collapse. Forget struggling to swim, the shark would literally implode. And I don't care how big your teeth are, you aren't really surviving an implosion. The trench is a literal death trap. But wait, there are sharks that live deep in the ocean right now. So why can they survive, but the Megalodon can't? If you say it's impossible for a shark to live in the freezing deep ocean, someone is probably going to bring up the Greenland shark. These are large sharks that live in near freezing waters. Greenland sharks can even live to be over 400 years old. So if they can do it, why couldn't the Megalodon? Well, it comes down to how these sleeper sharks actually survive. Greenland sharks survive the cold and the lack of food by essentially doing nothing. They're incredibly slow. They move at top speed of about 1 mile per hour. They're almost entirely scavengers, just slowly drifting along the bottom, waiting to stumble across a dead carcass, or really just anything that doesn't require them to actually try. They burn basically zero energy. The Megalodon was built for explosive speed, massive bite forces, and active hunting. Its entire anatomy is designed to burn energy quickly and take down massive prey. If a Megalodon somehow adapted to survive like a Greenland shark, moving at 1 mile per hour and eating dead scraps, it completely loses everything that makes it a Megalodon. You're just left with a slow scavenger, and its massive jaws would be completely useless for that lifestyle. So, biology says no, physics says no, the food supply says no, but if you still aren't convinced, there's one final piece of physical evidence that ends the debate completely. If you want to know if an animal is currently alive, you look for the evidence it leaves behind. For sharks, that evidence is incredibly obvious. Sharks don't have a permanent set of teeth. They basically just have a conveyor belt of teeth. As the front teeth get dull or break off during a hunt, they fall out, and a new row of teeth rotates forward to replace them. A single shark can shed tens of thousands of teeth over the course of its lifetime. Because of this, we find millions of Megalodon teeth all over the world. They wash up on beaches, they're found by scuba divers, and they're dug out of rock walls. But here's the catch. Every single Megalodon tooth we have found is a fossil. Fossilization takes at least 10,000 years, and usually much longer. When a fresh shark tooth falls out, it's white. Over millions of years, minerals seep into the tooth, turning it into a stone fossil. If Megalodons were currently swimming in the deep ocean, they'd be shedding fresh teeth every single day. The seafloor would be littered with them. Deep-sea rovers and dredging nets would constantly be pulling up fresh Megalodon teeth, but we have never found a single one. The fact that every tooth we find is a stone fossil proves that they haven't dropped a fresh one in millions of years. So, if it's definitively dead, what actually killed it? So what actually took down the most powerful shark in history? The weather. Yeah, not a giant sea monster, not a meteor, just getting a little too chilly. Around 3.6 million years ago, the Earth cooled down and an ice age began. Glaciers formed at the poles, which caused the global sea levels to drop dramatically. This was a massive problem for the Megalodon, because it relied on warm, shallow coastal waters to give birth and raise its young. With the sea levels dropping, those safe nursery habitats simply disappeared. But the real fatal blow came from its food. The baleen whales that Megalodon relied on for food were warm-blooded mammals. They had thick layers of blubber that insulated them from the cold. As the oceans cooled, the whales easily adapted. They just migrated toward the freezing waters near the poles. But the Megalodon was a warm-water shark. It couldn't handle the freezing temperatures. So, the whales swam north into the ice, and the Megalodon was physically trapped in the shrinking warm waters near the equator. Evolution simply outplayed it. The food left, and the shark couldn't follow. The biggest shark in history just slowly starved to death in the shallow waters it used to rule. So, if the science is clear, why are we all so obsessed with putting it at the bottom of the ocean? The Megalodon in the trench theory refuses to die, no matter how much evidence scientists provide. And honestly, this obsession has very little to do with the shark itself. It's entirely about the ocean. Humans really don't like the unknown. We look at the fact that 95% of the ocean is unexplored, and our brains instinctively panic. We know there's a crushing void right beneath us, and we hate not knowing what's inside of it. So, we project monsters into the dark. We take the scariest thing we can possibly imagine, a 50-foot prehistoric shark, and we stick it in the deepest place on the earth because it gives it a face to our fear. It's much easier to be afraid of a giant shark than it is to be afraid of an empty void. We want the monster to be real because it makes the mystery of the ocean feel more exciting and a little less isolating. Because apparently, a pitch black, freezing, crushing abyss just isn't quite scary enough for us. But the truth is, we don't need to bring prehistoric sharks back from the dead to be terrified of the deep sea. There's enough weird creatures down there already. But anyways, thank you guys for watching, and I hope you enjoyed. If you have any suggestions for what weird ocean mystery or extinct animal I should cover next, definitely let me know in the comments because I really do read them. And if you want to see another video like this one, check it out here.